So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chris Spoke. Thanks.
Shall we?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks. So we really wanted to have you up today because your group is doing probably one of the most exciting, has like a very unique strategy amongst builders and developers we're dealing with right now. We have a lot of multiplex builders we're dealing with, and you've built a few multiplexes with us, your group, but now you're kind of transitioning from the multiplex space to the mid-rise space. I just want to kind of get your thought process of kind of moving from kind of smaller 6-unit projects to kind of larger mid-rise projects.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm a partner in a company called Toronto Standard. We like to say we focus on the boutique end of mid-rise rental infill development. So 30 to 60 units is kind of our sweet spot, maybe even 40 to 60 units. And we could talk about some reasons for that specific threshold. There are like some policy reasons. So as you mentioned, 3 partners, we've been working on some multiplexes, up to 8 units for a number of years, kind of side of desk. And only really formed this company 2 years ago to focus on this larger, within the multiplex context, this larger mid-rise scale. We like mid-rise, we like rental, and then it just so happened that when we started this company, that was maybe the only thing that worked in the market, so the timing was quite good. And a big part of the thinking around moving up in scale was one, we're forming a development company, we have a team, we want to do this properly, professionally, and full-time, and there's a certain kind of like scale requirement to make that work. Two, a big part of the timing working out was there were these planning permissions that opened up when we started the business. So, many people in the room might know about the major streets policy, where all major streets in the city have recently been upzoned for 6-story apartment buildings, effectively as of right. You almost always need some variances, but effectively as of right. Avenues where larger mid-rise is permitted, 6 to 11 stories often. This is a policy that existed since 2013, but recently the number of avenues and the length of avenues has been extended so that more of the city can accommodate this mid-rise scale. And then finally, we think that this is actually a great time to be building rental housing in Toronto, and Dan mentioned a lot of this and showed a lot of the data that underpins our underwriting. So if you think it's a great time to be building rental in Toronto, you kind of want to build more than 5-6 units at a time. You want to take advantage of this moment in the market. So that's how we think about it.
Oh, interesting. I guess from a work standpoint, how do you find the work and planning that goes into building a 5-plex or a 6-plex or 8-plex versus a 40-unit building, multifamily?
Yeah, so at the 40 to 60 unit range, and we have 2 of these, and they're both taking advantage of different planning permissions. So this kind of like is a 2-part answer. The first part answer is that when we are leaning into major streets policy, as we are with a 50-unit 7-story building on Kipling in Etobicoke, it's a committee of adjustments process. It's not a zoning bylaw amendment, certainly not an official plan amendment. We are still above 10 units having to do site plan control, so the planning is still quite involved, but it's faster, relatively faster. There's some nuance around going to committee in Etobicoke in an election year. It's probably the worst time to go. Whereas on Dufferin, we're doing this actually with Cranston Capital, who's here. 60 units on an expanded avenue, but it will require zoning bylaw amendment, so it's a little bit more extended. So generally, you're spending more time getting to the point where you're pulling permits than you would on a 4+1 or 6+1. But many of the steps, like getting your zoning examiner's notice, going to committee, waiting for your appeal period, getting your zoning certificate is kind of like the same time, whether you're doing 50 units or 5 units. So it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Some savings. And I guess one of the issues between doing 6 units with a 6+1 versus a larger development, I guess you have to pay development charges on all of the units versus a development charge exemption.
Yeah.
I guess how do you? How would is it the scale just enables you to pay development charges and still have a pro forma that looks attractive?
Yeah, so there are these major thresholds in policy where if you're building 6 units, you pay no development charges. If you're building 7, you're paying all development charges. So you really don't want to build 7, 8, or 9 units. So that's one threshold where if you're going to go above 6, you have to go meaningfully above 6. At 11 units, you have to do site plan control, so you, again, don't want to do 11 or 12 units. If you're going to go above 10, you maybe want to go to 20. And the reason why I say 40 to 60 is because if we're incurring the development charges, if we're incurring site plan control, all the costs and time that go into that, we want the scale of the building to kind of make sense to absorb that additional time and costs. And the reason why, I'll mention it now, the reason why we cap ourselves at 60, a couple of reasons, but one of the big ones is 60 units is where a type G, like a city-size loading facility is required, and not just the space for, a city-size garbage truck to load your truck, your garbage, but also to be able to do kind of like what they call a frontward motion in and out of your site, so the turnaround area. And often we're looking at tighter infill urban sites that just can't fit those, so that's why we have the 60 cutoff. And then we're looking to build in parts of the city where we could underwrite strong rents with no parking, and often that's a question of conviction and absorption risk. And we like, underwriting 60 units absorbing without parking than maybe 300 or something like that.
Right. Okay, so 60, the major streets policy was passed, then it was appealed, and now, from my understanding, is it now in effect?
It is now in effect. So there was a settlement maybe 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
Very, very little change to the original policy language. But yeah, we had to get scoped out of the appeal for ourselves, but it is now in effect.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So your sites were scoped out, so you were able to take advantage of the major streets zoning changes, but you still had to go to committee of adjustments for.
Yeah, we're still I mean, one thing I'm noticing, certainly in Etobicoke, we also have a high-rise site on Lakeshore at Browns Line. We're seeing positive reaction from staff, up to and including positive staff reports, just to be shut down in community council because, not to mention any names, but there's at least one councillor in Etobicoke who's very anti-development, and this is kind of, again, this is an election year. This is when you rally your constituents to get angry about whatever you're angry about. So, there's a big risk there. We almost, at this point, if we were acquiring new sites, we'd probably be underwriting them with like a T-Lab appeal process baked into our timeline. Yeah. So that's something we're seeing.
So you've had to go to the T-Lab to get approval then?
We had, so this Kipling project, we haven't yet gone to committee. We're still basically fighting it out with planning to at least get their support at committee.
Right.
The good thing about a committee process versus a rezoning in this, again, political moment is that there's no council vote. It's ultimately up to the committee members. It doesn't help if the councillor writes a letter recommending rejection, but it is, at least in theory, a non-political process. Right.
And okay, so you're building. You have a few mid-rise projects on the way. Purpose-built rental. I guess you read the newspapers. Everyone's trying to. The newspaper reporters are kind of talking about falling rents, a softening economy, major completions from the high-rise condos. So I guess what's your thesis on why you find now is the time to build?
Yeah, so I'll repeat some of the things that Dan said, but maybe with kind of our lens on it. 22,500 units were completed in 2024. That's combining condo and rental. And we like to think of these somewhat bundled because, although rental stock, purpose-built rental is up, a lot of condo stock that has been built over the last 10 years has been effectively rental, right? It was kind of investor owned, but ultimately rented out on the secondary market. We're going down to like 9,000 completions in 2028. So the starts are falling off now, and starts are just, an early indicator of where completions are going to go. A lot of the projects we're taking on now, we don't expect to lease up until 2028 or sometimes even later. So we think the market is going to be extremely supply constrained then. There is some kind of flattening of population growth federally, but I do think that there's this kind of embedded growth obligation with just how our economy and country is set up. I was looking this up ahead of this talk, but we're currently at 3.4 working people per retiree. Back in the 90s, we were at 5.6 in 1991. We're on track to be at 2.6 by 2030 if we maintain current immigration policy, and it just does not work. This is like effectively a Ponzi scheme, the way we set up, pension financing in our welfare state. So there is I think just a mathematical obligation to continue with population growth. So if population growth will remain strong, certainly in Toronto and the GTA, and supply is crashing, what we're seeing is lower land costs than we've seen over the last 2-3 years. We are seeing softening on hard costs. We have gotten the HST rebate. I think we're going to hear a little bit about that. We might get development charge reductions. So costs are down. Everybody's a little bit scared because of rents are down in Toronto versus last year. But we're seeing that if you project out 2 to 3 years, you're really going to want to own some rental stock.
Interesting. And so I guess you're building now to take advantage of the shortage you see going forward.
That's right.
And I guess it's kind of funny. I really like your stat on the working age population to retired population. It kind of makes sense why the previous Liberal government kind of was so aggressive on the immigration to kind of help with the ratio a little bit. They kind of went maybe a bit too far too fast, but I guess we will need immigrants to kind of help support our retiree population.
I think we're going to get back to kind of like normalized growth levels, not what we've seen over the last couple of years where it really went out of pattern. But we're not going to get to this kind of like flat or even negative population growth, which some people are forecasting. There's just no way to make, basically our country work with that.
And so there's new policy coming out. I guess there's the major transit station areas around GO train stations and subway stations. Do you have a view on, like, do you see that as an opportunity, or where would you see an optimal strategy for that development to be?
Yeah, so just in case anyone's not familiar, so the province recently passed legislation upzoning Toronto's major transit station areas. These are areas roughly within 800 meters of subway stations. So just kind of at a very high level, if you're on mixed use or neighborhoods or apartment neighborhoods designated land, this is typically on major streets. You're going to be between 6 and 8 FSI as of right once the city updates its bylaws to match provincial direction. If you're within neighborhoods, within a PMTSA, protected major transit station area, 4 stories as of right, within 200 meters of a subway station, even in the neighborhood, 6 stories as of right. We like this scale. There are some things that we are asking the province to do on the building code side to make it a little bit more feasible, but we like this scale. And basically what this does is it opens much more of the city for this scale of development.
I guess like land prices haven't really caught up yet in the major transit station areas. I feel like it hasn't really caught on. So I guess where would you see, like, if somebody in this audience were to be looking for a site, what would attract you about buying in a major transit station area?
So major transit station areas include areas around subway stations, LRT stations, and GO stations. And you could imagine some kind of GO stations, even some subway stations around Toronto are getting a ton of development applications. So I think it's like Yonge and Steeles, there's like 50 towers proposed. Some of the big GO stations have a lot of towers proposed. But then if you think about subway stations like Broadview, like Runnymede, like Ossington, like Christie, where there is not a lot of density and ultimately not a lot of inventory available for rent, I think that's where the opportunity is. You still have to buy your land well, because ultimately at this scale, you're still competitive and competing with end users. So you still need to find, in our case, as run down a property as possible. But really being able to increase density in neighborhoods that have not increased density over the last 10, 20 years, where you could get strong rents, I think is going to be a major opportunity.
And just going back, I think you mentioned hard costs. Where are you seeing hard costs for mid-rise versus for the kind of 6+1 multiplex? Like, how would you see the difference in hard cost per square foot for either product?
Yeah, so if we're sticking to Part 9 of the building code, which is at like 3 stories, and you don't need to introduce sprinkler systems, life safety systems, we think that 300 a square foot is kind of like a conservative underwriting. This is obviously like a stick frame, simple build. Once we get into mid-rise, we have seen a softening of hard costs, maybe to the like 350 to 380 a square foot range. But this, at least in our model, relies on a couple of important things. One, it relies on the market softening, which doesn't hurt. But it also relies on the fact that we're not building any below-grade areas. So we're not excavating, we're not shoring, we're not dewatering, we're not doing any of that stuff. And we're keeping cast-in-place concrete to a minimum. So we'll typically pour a slab on grade, but then we're doing precast concrete for our shafts and our floors. And often it's like a panelized cold-form steel wall system for our structure. If you stay away from below-grade areas, if you stay away from cast-in-place concrete, and if you take advantage of the fact that more trades are looking for work than are not, you get much better construction costs than you did a few years ago.
That's terrific. So I think we should open up to the audience. Does anybody have any questions for Chris and his group and his strategy on the mid-rise? Question?
How do you see the whole modular and prefab playing into the type of the building that you
Yeah, so the question was about prefab and modular construction. I think of it as a spectrum. So on one end, you kind of have prefabricated panelized components, which we take advantage of. So again, precast concretes, these are coming from stubbies on the back of a flatbed and being dropped on site. Our cold form steel wall sections are panelized. We use a vendor called Vanderwall. As soon as you get into like volumetric 3D, I think a lot of the economics break down. A lot of the cost savings that you get through like prefabrication are basically given up in construction. Your design is a lot more constrained. When you're talking about full modular, like 3D units that you could drop in place, to me that works well for like workforce housing, maybe shelters, maybe prisons, maybe Holidays Inn, but like nice infill rental product that we want to rent for at least $4.25 a square foot. We need a bit more flexibility. So like some prefabrication, not full modular is how we think about it.
Sorry for the family photos there. It was a good trip to the Dominican. Did you put?
Any questions on the family photo?
Nice.
Do we have any more questions for the panel? No? Do you want to wrap up, or are you going to ask some more questions?
I think we'll wrap up.
Maybe
Sorry
one
about
thing
that,
I'll just add briefly on that last question. One of the things that's enabled us to go to these kind of prefabricated, specifically on the floors, the precast concrete, and this is also a big part of hard costs coming down from mid-rise, is the mid-rise design guidelines were updated 18 months ago. So it used to be, and you'll recognize this around the city, that you were required to adhere with a rear 45-degree angular plane so that every story stepped back on your way up. This was to mitigate shadow impacts on any adjacent neighborhood. And what that meant in practice is that every floor was a transfer slab, and you had to kind of like design that with your structural engineer, and almost required, just as a function of that, cast in place concrete, because your rebar ratios and everything were changing as you went up. You can now build, thanks to the updated mid-rise design guidelines, much boxier buildings, kind of like how we used to build, and just this, it makes for a much simpler structural design and does enable, in our case, precast concrete.
And Chris, on the policy front, aside from the major transit station areas, is there anything else that you've heard at City Hall that's really exciting you?
Yeah, so City Hall and province, and we just had the federal budget. We were hoping to see, among other things, like the MERB tax credit and maybe a few other things that we did not see. One thing that's giving me some cautious optimism provincially, we've been, I think, quite disappointed with how little the province has done over the last 4 years. But they have announced in their latest housing bill, Bill 60, a section-by-section Ontario Building Code review. So, I think a lot of people in this room build at this 3, 4, 5-story scale, and you know that once you go from 3 to 4-story and you trigger part 3, it's like almost never worth it unless you're getting much more density and leasable area out of your build. It's just like too much of a leap, and on smaller part 3 buildings, we're doing the same kind of life safety systems on 6 units that we would do if we were building 60 or even 200 units. So we speak to people at the Ministry of Housing. As part of this section by section review, they're exploring the idea of a part of the building code that would be like halfway in between part 9 and part 3. That would be very helpful. There's been a lot of talk over the last few years around allowing for a single means of egress up to 6 stories. So BC updated their building code to allow for a single shared exit stair up to 6 stories. This would help on constrained, tight infill sites like ours. We've been advocating for European standard elevators, which are cheaper and smaller than North American elevators. These are all things that don't make or break projects, but at the margin, they help tighter sites pencil. So we're hoping to see some action now that this review has been announced. Municipally, the big thing that everybody's been waiting for is development charge relief, right? We were promised federally in the last election campaign that the federal government would work with provinces and municipalities for a 50% reduction in development charges. We've seen municipalities around the GTA reduce and in some cases waive development charges altogether. Vaughan, Burlington, Mississauga. I think Hamilton is rumored to be doing something soon. We haven't seen anything, that systematic in Toronto. We've seen reduction in development charges on affordable housing projects, but not for the market as a whole. So we underwrite with the full development charge pop, but I think there's a better than 50% chance that over the next 18 months there is some relief on development charges.
Yeah, I agree. And not to put you on the spot, but if there was a mayoral election happening today, would you endorse a particular candidate?
Yeah, I think is this a Brad Bradford room? I don't know, but I think the competitive candidates are probably Brad, the current incumbent mayor, Olivia Chow, and John Tory. One quick anecdote maybe about Brad Bradford. When the Major Streets policy was first proposed, it was proposed with a 30-unit cap. And planning had prepared an economic analysis that showed that in many parts of the city, including Etobicoke and Scarborough, 30 units was not enough density to make your land acquisition pencil. And we lobbied pretty aggressively to have that unit cap removed. It doesn't make sense to me that there should be a unit cap. You know, if I have a 40-foot wide frontage or a 400-foot wide frontage, I should be able to scale my building accordingly. We weren't able to get the unit cap removed, but we did, and this was largely thanks to Councillor Brad Bradford, who at the time was vice chair of the Planning and Housing Committee. It was increased to 60 units to at least match the Type G exemption threshold. So
He's doing good work already.
I like him, yeah.
Awesome. I think you have a question over here. Gabor?
Hey. So I guess, I don't know if you've heard, but I'm wondering down the grapevine if you've heard some news about the sixplexes being, as of right, extending to other wards other than the 9 wards that are within Toronto, because there would be a huge opportunity if that would be the case, and I'm just curious if you've heard anything about that.
Totally. I'll answer that, and actually I'll add on your question about more at the municipal level. So the Avenue study, basically, there's a map of major streets, and the city kind of like draws some of those streets and designates them as avenues where 6 to 11-story heights are permitted. That map was expanded, but there are additional work streams to redesignate those avenues in the official plan and into rezoning them in the zoning bylaw. That's very positive. Expanding 6-unit sixplex permissions is positive. I don't see anything happening before October, which is the election date. You know, anything that upsets residents associations will be deferred, as the recent retail and neighborhoods debate was. I think it'll be deferred till after October, unfortunately. Yeah.
Terrific. So Chris, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Looking forward to the next Missing Middle Summit. Is it scheduled?
Yeah, so we host an event not too dissimilar from this one called the Missing Middle Summit. It'll be on May 13th next year, and it's for people, this emerging industry of people who are building at this scale, for us to all kind of join together and trade notes as we're doing here.
Looking forward to it. Really appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.